just makes a lot of sense. This makes a lot of sense for me as a cook to want to be closer to the environment. I always believe that cooking is, in some respects or many respects, it's an environmental act. And certainly being a chef or a cook of some level, we're dealing daily with nature. We're dealing daily with ingredients that are produced by nature.
Hey folks, welcome to the latest episode of the You Can't Eat Money podcast. I'm really excited to share this episode as today's guest was one of the very first people to say yes to being on the show. Chef Dan Hunter is the chef owner of Brae in Australia, which is coming up on its 10-year anniversary in December later this year. Many of you might have come across Dan and Brae in Zac Efron's Netflix show, Down to Earth. If you haven't, Brae is a restaurant with guest rooms located on a 23-acre organic farm about 90 minutes from Melbourne in an area where dinosaurs once roamed, as Dan puts it in the episode. In those 10 years, Brae has appeared on the world's 50 best list, along with earning 3 hats, which basically means that it's one of the very best restaurants in Australia as well as the world. In the episode, we touch on Dan's journey to opening Brae, including swearing off living in a country town like the very one Brae is located in now when he was 18, to being inspired by the farm and restaurant relationship during his time working in Spain. What I think is most striking is Dan's genuine connection to his ingredients. He has a real land ethic that I'm sure folks like Aldo Leopold and Wendell Berry would approve of. The way he speaks of his connection to the land and appreciation of what it produces is incredibly inspiring. We end with a great tip on how you can cultivate this connection for yourself, even if you don't live on a farm or run a restaurant. This is a really special episode, and I feel incredibly thankful to Dan for his transparency and knowledge. Please make sure to check out the show notes for links to some of the items mentioned in the episode. The short film is definitely worth your time. Without further delay, here's the latest episode of the You Can't Eat Money podcast with chef owner of Brae, Dan Hunter. So today on the You Can't Eat Money podcast, we have the chef and owner of Brae in Australia, Dan Hunter. Thanks for joining us, Dan.
Thanks, Rick. Thanks for having me.
I'm really excited to talk to you because I first learned about Brae, as I'm sure many of our listeners did, through Zac Efron's Netflix show, Down to Earth. And so that painted a pretty beautiful picture of Brae and where it's situated in Australia. But maybe for those listeners who haven't seen that episode of the show on Netflix, can you give us a sense of where Brae is located in Australia, what sort of the environment it exists in?
Yeah, of course. And I mean, I guess quick to point out that Zac Efron and Down to Earth did a great job of showing the quality of life, and I guess the offering that we have at the restaurant and at the farm. But essentially, Brae is a working farm and restaurant, and also a little bit of accommodation. And it's a 24 acre farm, about an hour and a half from Melbourne, southwest from Melbourne. So it's in the southern part of Australia. It's in a part of Australia known as the Otway Ranges. It's very close to the ocean, close being probably 20 kilometers by land across, as a crow flies. We have weather that's, like all of us, ever changing. To be honest, it's up and down, but it's essentially it's a region that has very specific seasonality in terms of a hot summer and quite a cold winter. We have quite a wet spring. Traditionally we get our annual rainfall mostly in spring, but it's a very beautiful part of the world. We're in an area that's known for agriculture, but also tourism, and we border a sort of a beautiful rainforest in the Otways, so lots of waterfalls and tree ferns, and a place where dinosaurs once roamed, and it's a very beautiful part of Australia.
Amazing. And so how does Brae fit in that? Like when you look at your cuisine and your restaurant and your farming operation, like how does Brae work with that unique environment?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose what maybe makes us different from some others, but obviously, today the concept of a restaurant that's not in a major city but is on the outskirts or is a destination itself is not uncommon. Obviously, today it's obviously something which is in Europe and it's in the States, and even places like Japan have a strong tradition of country inns where the food is excellent and the accommodation is excellent, and they work with their local community and their environment to produce a cuisine of place. And I suppose in that sense, we're similar to that we're a part of a small community. We're in a town or on the edge of a town of just 900 people, and as I said, it's about an hour and a half from Melbourne. Between us and Melbourne is Victoria. That's our state, our second city, Geelong, and that's about 35-40 minutes away. And for people familiar with I guess Victoria and that part of Australia, the Great Ocean Road is the sort of the major tourist attraction of Victoria, and it's a rural sort of motorway that hugs the coastline in Victoria, and it's very rugged, and it's lots of rock formations and beautiful vistas across the ocean and across the coastline. So I guess in a sense we try to cook a cuisine of that place, something that represents our varying seasonalities, something that represents the producers and growers of our region, and we work in a way that where we produce a lot of food ourselves, vegetables, fruit, things that are non-animal related, but not to say that we don't serve animals, but we certainly, our skills are in the plant kingdom in terms of agriculture. And we just try and, I try and cook something which is high quality, which is detailed in its understanding of cuisine and of ingredients, and hopefully it's very generous in its spirit in terms of hospitality.
I found a video on your YouTube channel that was really interesting, and one of the folks on your staff talked about the reason that Brae is sort of a lunchtime restaurant, because they want people to be able to go and explore the farm and see where their food comes from. For people who maybe haven't had the chance or might not get the chance in the near future to visit Brae, what could they expect to find on the farm that is part of your grounds at Brae?
I suppose one of the reasons that Sebastiano, who was the gentleman interviewed at that time and discussing that, was mentioning the idea of walking around the property is, I guess one of the things that we try to do is allow people to get a little bit more in touch with the environment and to be connected to the concept of where food comes from. I think sometimes in a restaurant it's very easy. I mean, look, if you think, a city restaurant, any major city, capital city, anywhere in the world, it's very common to have the blinds down, you lock the outside out, and you just sort of in a bubble inside. And really after one or two courses, unless it's a very exceptional place, you could be in any city in the world. I think the identity of place is sometimes left out of the equation while we sort of let the cooks and the chefs have their moment. But I guess for us, we really want people to do the opposite, in a sense, to have contact with the environment and with the place, and that being the case, we encourage and certainly allow for people to leave the restaurant in the meal at some time, weather depending, obviously, and just explore a little bit of the grounds of the property. As I said previously, it's a 23-acre farm, and all the growing zones and areas, fruit orchards and olive grove and our vegetable garden are all in plain sight and plain view for the guests to have a look through. And I guess, I don't know, we're just trying to create something where not only is it an experience which is hopefully very detailed and good, and then it's a meal and there's sort of some nourishment, both physically and emotionally, during the course of the meal, and the experience at Brae, but also a way to show that growing food organically and growing food with care and attention, does actually translate to something and does mean something. And being outside and being in nature, particularly for many of our guests who travel either from international cities or from other cities in Australia, where we live a hurried lifestyle and we our attention spans are probably decreasing and our life's online, and we're looking for hits all the time. The dopamine's sort of running fast and furious whenever we can, just to maybe take a step back a little bit, and just enjoy whatever the day is doing and whatever the farm is doing at that time, and hopefully just consume a little bit of Mother Nature while it's on the offer, while it's being offered.
That's an amazing idea and sort of genesis for a restaurant and a destination. What led you to want to create something like that? Was there another chef? Was there an experience on a farm or with a producer? Like what led you to get to this point of Brae? 'Cause I think you've been around for eight or so years, right?
Yeah, it's actually our 10th anniversary in December. So December 23 will be 10 years on the property. And about 20 years ago now, actually in 2003, my wife Jules and I left Australia and went and lived in Spain for close to 4 years. And at that time, after a couple of years in Barcelona, we moved to the north to Donosti or San Sebastian, and I worked in a restaurant called Mugaritz, and it was outside of the city of San Sebastian and at about 15 kilometers out in farmland. And previous to that, I have always worked in cities, in Melbourne and then in Barcelona. And, growing up, actually, between the ages of 12 and 18, I lived in a country town, and it was sort of a town that was probably too big to be quaint and not big enough to have anything exciting, or, certainly wasn't a city by no means. And it was 300 kilometers from Melbourne. And at 18, I swore I'd never live in a country town again. And by chance, after cooking for several years and ended up working, as I said, at Mugaritz, and just riding a scooter through farmland to work and seeing things be delivered to the back door of the kitchen and having these relationships with growers, doing things specifically for the restaurant based on the needs of the restaurant. It just made a lot of sense to me to want to be a bit closer to agriculture. One, to take a little bit of control over the quality of ingredients that we had access to, but also that opportunity to provide something which is that slows down the guest and sort of allows for a very short-term relationship between guest and the business, in a sense, each time they're at the restaurant, but obviously a longer term relationship if they're return guests over many years. But just that chance to slow things down and to have a deeper connection with guests, and I think, and over time, like I'd worked for 6 years out of the city as well after returning from Spain and before opening Brae, and just makes a lot of sense. This makes a lot of sense for me as a cook to want to be closer to the environment. I always believe that cooking is, in some respects or many respects, it's an environmental act, and certainly being a chef or a cook of some level, we're dealing daily with nature. We're dealing daily with ingredients that are produced by nature, and I don't know, it just seems to deteriorate the quality or the connection of that, for me at least, to do that in a city. And I don't believe my cooking could be as fluid and as connected and as probably, I don't know, just in tune with the seasons as it is, if I was in the city, if I was, catching public transport to work and touching food that had been handled 10 times before it got to me, like it's just, it just seems a bit out of place for me as a cook, and I think, obviously there's lots of great, many, the most in the world are based in cities because that's mostly where humans live today, but some of my great experiences also as a diner have been lunches in remote parts of the world, without the hustle and bustle of the next appointment or the city in your face. So it's nice, I think, for our team as well. They often comment about, particularly people who've worked in other restaurants in cities over time, to talk about how the guests are much more relaxed and much more easygoing and much more ready just to go on a bit of a journey with us when they come to Brae, rather than demanding that things speed up or they need to be somewhere or any of those things that happen when you're serving. So that's also very nice as well.
And when you look at that environmental connection that you have, and you're much closer to it where you are in Brae versus the times you've worked in the city, how does that influence, I guess, sort of your menu planning, your dish planning? Like, do you start with the vegetable? Do you start with, I don't know, some of the local seafood that you have access to? Is it more of the animal? Like, what pieces do you put together in what order? And is that influenced by being so close and connected to the land?
It's a bit of both, like I won't say that it's either or. It's in a sense we grow a lot of food. We grow a ton of food, and as an example, on a daily basis, we're probably putting 100 kilos of green waste into compost that's done on site. This is just things coming back to the kitchen where they're not being used by the kitchen. They're the sort of things that if you buy the majority of your vegetables from a supplier have been cut off at the market or been cut off by the grower to send to market, they're the tops of vegetables or whatever. So there's that, and there's several hundred fruit trees on the property. There's 120 olive trees, and which we press, and we have a 10-acre paddock or a 4-hectare paddock that we dedicate to grain production for wheat, or for bread or for beer or different things. So there's a lot going on, and so to be on top of all of that, of course we have seasonal planning. Of course we approach the year in terms of our understanding of what grows well and what we're interested in, and then we try and make do the sums for what's required in the space that we have, and try and get all that right. And obviously that's up and down. That's varies seasonally, and that varies on depending on the quality of the seed or whatever environmental changes that occur regularly. And then of course there's a spontaneity of just being in nature, of just being on the property, of just working in this way where you're seeing things in a very raw state, or sometimes items just growing together, things that you hadn't thought about, things that you didn't imagine would work together, but you just perhaps have never even considered it. And you may find yourself walking through the orchard or in the garden and seeing some different vegetables growing together and tasting things. I often walk through the garden and just eat things as I go and look at things, and there's lots of aromas, and it's very tactile. You're very much being enveloped by what's around you. And sometimes some of the best things that I probably can't take credit for, because they're not ideas that I've ever had, but things that have just been around me, and I've been in the right place at the right time and have tasted those items. And some dishes have just come out of that. And in all honesty, some of those things may last a day or 2 days or 1 day, or like just 3 tables or whatever it is. So there is that element of things which are very exciting, which for all the planning in the world you couldn't conjure up unless you had this great R&D team that was ahead of the curve the whole time, which we don't. So I think in that side of things, I really enjoy that, the spontaneity mixed in with the idea that you're learning each season, and you're getting a deeper almost a portfolio of knowledge about what's possible on this site, and better skills at managing this area and improving the health of the environment whilst you go, and getting better results year on year because you've done that work previously also. So 10 years of a property being strictly organic with zero synthetic or chemical fertilizers and pesticides and herbicides removed from the property, and then focusing on just growing things in a way where you're constantly inputting back into the soil and back into the property, and just the net result of that is it's hard to describe sometimes, because it's pretty remarkable to see a property that's surrounded by sort of grazing farms, sheep farms, and if you were to look at Brae from an aerial map today, it's like a nature reserve, like it's just covered in plants and trees, and it's super green when others aren't, and we have native Australian animals sort of hanging out here rather than in other places, so it's very beautiful as well as being very productive.
What's interesting that you're describing, I think, for probably a lot of our listeners. So a couple weeks ago, we had Chef Douglas McMaster of Silo, and he has written extensively about sort of creating a pre-industrial food system. And his main aim is to reduce waste from the food system. I think what you're describing here is a move away from industrial food system, but in a way that is more about this spontaneity and discovery and connection with ingredients, which that industrial food system where food's been handled by 10 different people before it even reaches the chef. How do you think about translating how close you're able to get to the ingredients to the actual diner? Like, what do you think about, how do you think about making that connection for them when at Brae, they might be able to go and see that same combination of things growing together in a way that other places might not. But when you think about putting it on a plate, how do you help diners connect with that?
Yeah, it's a funny one, because I think I think we're unfortunately probably quite cynical as a race about today. I think there's so much talk, and there's so much, to be honest, there's so much greenwashing and marketing around the concept of environmentalism, and of course restaurants are crazy for it as well. I think restaurants, we have to be realistic here, that restaurants are terrible, is in terms of polluters. You only have to walk down the back lane of any city and see the bins or whatever that are out the back lane that are just overflowing with like green waste and just single-use plastics and all these things. I think we're not known as an industry for being environmentally conscious, and I think even some of our young chefs who come into the restaurant, you sort of need to remind them that this is their environment. This is them. I'm 50 this year. It's sort of like, there's this big argument about from younger generations talking about older generations having ruined the planet before they got a chance, but it's actually a lot of people of my generation today who are owning restaurants and owning agricultural businesses, trying to make a huge effort to probably not to fix, but to realign or get us back on track through their businesses. So I think for us, just giving people a chance to actually see that things that they ate in the restaurant grew on this property, and understand the concept that, I don't know, there was no delivery occurred for this to happen. There was no fossil fuels burnt, so this could be on their plate. There was no packaging occurring, so they could have that food. There was no, air miles flying it in from some foreign place, or the water that they consumed in the restaurant was rainwater captured on site. The rain in our region comes pretty much off the ocean. It comes off the Southern Ocean and doesn't cross any industry whatsoever before it lands in our water tanks, and we serve that water in the restaurant, both carbonated and still, and I think just the simple connection of those things back to a place where things are very clean and very pure, and there's been an effort to do that, and then you realize the effort's not that difficult. It's not that it's impossible, and it's not huge budget, and it's not technology. It's just the simple fact of putting a tank next to your house and using that water first, and being conscious of not wasting other things. I think that has I think sometimes the simplicity of it all has more impact than anything that we put on the plate. I think sometimes the fact that we sign the garden and we put signs up and walking on the walking path so people can see where they are and see what's occurring. They might go for a walk after one of the courses and come back into the restaurant, and they'd be like, I saw everything I ate. I just saw the whole menu laid out in a paddock, and obviously there's some understanding and skill in the kitchen. I hope it's recognized, and maybe the food that we serve here is not the food that you eat at home, but the concept of growing the food that is something you can do yourself. The basic concepts that we approach things with are not modern. They're not new things. They're just in an environment where maybe people don't expect them. I think sometimes we overcomplicate, we overcomplicate stuff. We overcomplicate things. We look to technology to provide the answers, probably more often than not today. And this is just simple, like roll your sleeves up and get your fingernails a bit dirty, and you can have very good food for yourself and your family.
So what does it take to sort of run this, 20, I think it said 23, 24 acre farm on Brae, get the food that you need for the restaurant? What does your team look like? What roles are people playing to help make that happen?
It's a high labor environment, to be fair. It is definitely that. And I think perhaps that's maybe the thing that gets in the way sometimes. We've lost the ability to just do the work, the physical labor required to do things in a way that's safe and green. And there's no doubt about the fact that organics is about just doing the work. It is about that. It is a long way. It's the slow way, the long way, but it's also the delicious way, and the way that's good for you. Our team is myself and Jules, my wife, who is our operations manager, and we're obviously the co-owners, and myself in the kitchen. We have a head chef under me, and then we have about 8 others in the kitchen. We have a restaurant manager and about 6 others working out the front in the dining room. And then we have an administrative person who works a few days a week. We have housekeepers for our guest suites, which there are 6 guest suites. And then we have a team of 2 full-timers in the veggie garden and food growing areas and grounds, and then a couple of casuals working on the rest of the grounds and on maintenance and sort of upkeep. In recent years, we've reduced the size of the restaurant. We were a bit larger pre-COVID, and over the years, we've always reduced the size as we become more familiar with the capacity of the farm to grow food. And I think now we've got it to a size that is really suited to the team structure that we have and the size of the property that we have and the climate that we have. So we currently only do about 28 guests in the restaurant, but I probably reeled off about 28 or 30 staff at that point just then. And so, yeah, we're a mix of about 18, 19 full-time staff and about half a dozen to 8 casual staff or part-time staff. It's a lot of hands. Yeah, the truth is it's a high labor, high detail environment. I think the labor and the detail is noticeable for our guests. I think it's something which people come to enjoy from the experiences at Brae. And yeah, I think to do something which is as authentic and real as this project, it does require a certain amount of people to be able to put what we do on the plate and have the property in a space or in a state which is in line with what occurs in the restaurant.
That's amazing. And so when we think about those connection points with the diners, one thing when we had a chef Dan Barber on, who one of his restaurants is also on a farm, he talked about the importance of the staff being able to communicate the story of the ingredients and be able to answer diners' questions. Brae has such a unique setup. How do you think about that informational piece? Like, yes, they can tour the grounds, but do you also have to train staff? Are the people that are coming to Brae just, of the similar mindset to you, of like, they really want to elevate this connection people can have with their food and with the environment?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Staff training is paramount and is ongoing, and it's always evolving. It's as is the property and as is the knowledge and as is agriculture, full stop. It's an ongoing, ever-changing, evolving sort of practice, and one season is not the same as the next. And we're living in a time where season to season is becoming very unpredictable, and we're having very hot summers and then very wet years, total years, 3 years of just rainfall. And in my communications outside of the business with our local community, with people who have been farming families in this region for a couple of generations, the general consensus is that they don't know what to do right now. That all of the skills and practice and handed down knowledge that's occurred over the time of their families being on this land is somewhat irrelevant because of the environmental changing that's occurring. So that being the case, I guess we're probably lucky that we're a small organisation in all actual fact, a small scale agriculture. Although it's very large for a restaurant, it's very small if we're in fact going to market. And we have the luxury that the dining room is our market. That we produce this food, and we generally always have a sale because it's happening through restaurant plates. So I can't imagine what it's like for others, but essentially our head gardener Jo, she does a weekly report for us every Friday. She gives us an update on what's occurring within the vegetable garden and the orchards. It's a very detailed spreadsheet of every single thing that's growing at that moment, about what state they're at in terms of their lifespan, their growing period, and the sort of numbers and the harvest expectations for the following week, and then things that are occurring which are coming up or that need to be removed and all those things. And she'll just provide a sort of one page, one A4 page sort of summary of each of those things and any sort of seasonal notes that occur. And we will have access to that every Friday. And from that information, myself and Jason, our head chef, tend to understand what the menus will look like the following week. And for our front of house team, any sort of beverages that they may be making from those foods will be decided on that weekend and ready to go for the following week. And then there's a discussion about those things with the whole team when we come back from the weekend. Our working week is sort of Wednesday to Saturday. And then every month, Jo will take the whole front of house and the kitchen team once a month on a very detailed walk around the property and go through things that are occurring and have some discussions about anything that she's sort of trying out, or some explanations about some of the agricultural practices that are occurring on the property, and just so they get a full picture and can communicate those things clearly with our guests who are generally very interested. Obviously when they're in a place like us or like ours, they're pretty interested to know what's happening and to understand the practices occurring on the property. And I don't feel as though we're maybe to our detriment sometimes in terms of an understanding outside of the business, but we're probably not ones to be really pushing this agenda all the time publicly, because we just do feel like it's the right thing to do. Like it's what you should be doing if you're growing food, what you should be doing, the types of the quality food you should be serving when you're working with food. So, but we obviously have an environmental statement on our website, and that's there for everyone to see what occurs on the property. And so that helps to have that sort of stuff to explain and to communicate with the guests.
And have you seen with the changing conditions, changing environment, have you already seen certain ingredient availability change, or certain things grow better or not grow quite as well in your own farm space?
Look, I think it's not as specific as ingredients. Again, I guess 10 years, it's a blip, isn't it? 10 years, like it feels long when you're running a business. And I must say we've seen remarkable change on the property, and trees that I planted 10 years ago today are 40 foot tall, some of them. And some of the orchards, a citrus orchard, 80 trees or so, is just out of control. It's just beautiful and established and prolific, and it's wonderful to see these things. And we have planted thousands of various plants on the property, mainly native Australian plants to this region, and things that are creating an ecosystem, which you need to have with organics. You need to have the wildlife hanging out. You need to have good bugs, insects hanging around. You need to have bird life to eat insects that may be not so good for the plants, So having an organic property does require having a biodiversity as much as you can, and having ground cover. So that's certainly been important. But we've had years where we irrigate our whole property through captured rainwater. So we have 3 large dams on the property where water's captured in the wetter months, and then we use to irrigate all the vegetables. And obviously, vegetable growing does require some amount of irrigation, And there's been years where we've been totally dry. We've probably had in the 10 years we've had three really hot summers and dry periods. And one particular year we were down to such little water that we actually had a chance to dig out our main dam, get a machine in there and actually dig out 20 truckloads of clay from that and increase the capacity, which has never been dry again, which I'm glad we had the chance to do that. And then the last 3 years, we've had a La Nina period of just ridiculous amounts of rain and excessive rainfall and rain all through summer. And look, I've got to say, I don't mind that side of the environmental implications, because to have what's considered a cooler summer in this part of the world, where summers can have multiple days over 40 degrees Celsius when you're trying to grow food, you can take a hit from that. You can really lose crops, and it's not that pleasant to be in such extreme heat. So these last couple of years have been quite wet, have allowed, in all honesty, the property to really drink some water and trees to grow, and the garden to be pretty prolific in that time. So it hasn't hurt this specific property in that time. But as I said earlier, we grow food, and our marketplace is the dining room. And in the worst case scenario, we can always buy from someone else. We don't only serve what we grow. We do still buy from other suppliers and other producers, a minimum amount of vegetables, but obviously all of our proteins are from local growers. In that worst case scenario, we do have the opportunity to still purchase from other people who we know and trust and appreciate their agricultural practices, and still make a sale. But I think it's more difficult if agriculture is your life, this changing environment.
For our final question, we always like to ask guests, based on their unique set of experiences, what advice would you have for the average eater, the average diner, home cook, about wanting to cook, eat, consume food in a more environmentally, ecologically responsible manner? What advice would you have for them with everything that you know so far?
I think it's fair to say that you need to eat more plants. There's no doubt about that. I think that's I think we can all agree on that. I don't think there's any need to remove meat from your diet if you choose not to. I think it's fine. But certainly eat more plants and grow some yourself. I think there's parts of the world where organics is maybe losing a bit of its shine in some places, because we're getting these monoculture organic situations now in some countries. And monoculture, organic or not, is not a good system. It's still food for the masses, and if you can remove yourself from the industrial food systems in some way, by growing something at home, you're having some impact. I think you're doing something. The two simplest things to grow, and most people love them, are tomatoes and strawberries. And you can grow them in a pot, on a veranda, in a small courtyard. As long as you get a little bit of sunshine, you can grow those two items. They're both prolific, and they're always way, way better than the ones you can buy at a supermarket, no matter what style you grow. And to eat a warm tomato in summer straight from the plant, or to eat warm strawberries straight off the plant that you grew, not only makes you feel good, but it's just very, very delicious and very simple. You can't go wrong, really.
I love that. And I agree. Tomatoes and strawberries. I actually, the biggest challenge that I have on my patio in London with the strawberries is the gray squirrels coming and trying to steal our strawberries, which maybe is a sign they're also delicious to non-humans. But yeah, definitely second that advice. So thank you so much, Dan, for taking the time to chat. I've learned a lot, and I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Rick. Thanks for having me on.